Welcome. If you're a woman who has a sense that there's more out there for you, you're in the right place. I'm Whitney Baker, host of the Electric Ideas podcast. Somewhere along the line of work and kids, life carried on, but I lost track of my truth. I'm on a reflective journey, and that's what this podcast is all about. Each week, I interview a woman who is lighting her own path and offering others hope. Before our conversation ends, we'll share a reflective question for you to explore. Sometimes all we need is a jolt, a fresh idea, an aha moment that connects us to a sense of possibility. This, my friends, is what I call an electric idea. Welcome back to Electric Ideas. I'm your host, Whitney Baker. As we approach the holiday season, I know it is a time that is filled with lots of joy for many people, but it also can be a time where we face some extra stressors. For those of us in long-term relationships, I think now is actually a really good time to start checking in and tuning in with your partner. I know many couples, especially with kids, sometimes start feeling more like co-managers than connected parents in their relationships. And if you're like me, I know you crave an extra sense of closeness at this time of year with your partner. And I want to be intentional so that I feel like I'm navigating the season with my husband together and not letting the stress and responsibilities create distance between us in what can be a magical time for connection. That's why I'm thrilled today to share my conversation with Abby Nordquist, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and also a relationship expert who does a lot of programming around how to maintain that connection after children. Abby has spent years helping couples reconnect and stay on the same page, especially during the busy parenting years. In today's conversation, we explore some of the common reasons why partners drift apart after having kids and a mix of wisdom and practical ways to communicate better, feel closer, and rediscover each other, even when life gets demanding. If you are somebody who doesn't want to feel like you're living a parallel life with your partner this holiday season and beyond, and are ready to reconnect and reprioritize your relationship, you are going to have so many takeaways. Let's get into it. Abby, welcome to the show.
Hi, Whitney. Thanks so much for having me.
So the research is clear that relationship satisfaction definitely dips during the parenting years. Can we start with you telling us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does. And it's something that most couples experience, and especially in the first 5 years of marriage, the research is really clear that satisfaction drops. I see this in my therapy practice. I see this with coaching clients, and the reasons for it are pretty complex. There are a lot of different factors that go into why couples tend to feel less connected, less satisfied, less happy in their relationship once they become parents. I see those things falling into three categories. Like if I look at all the different kind of factors that are happening for couples, every couple is unique. There are different things that are happening for each one. But I've generally found that those areas can be put into one of three, or maybe even all three for some couples, categories. The first is that oftentimes couples have a hard time prioritizing their relationship. It gets pushed to the bottom of the list. Things are overwhelming. There's so many things that we're doing as parents and trying to take care of ourselves, our kids, work, all the things. And that relationship with our partner can kind of slowly drift down the list. And that is really hard on the relationship, especially over time. The second is that the connection itself isn't good. And that has to do with a lot of factors also around communication, around conflict, just that romance and the sexual relationship is a huge piece of the connection. And then the third factor is not feeling like a good team, having a lot of conflict over parenting, division of labor, feeling like you're not on the same page with all the important things. And when couples are struggling in one, two, or three of those categories, it starts to really decrease their overall feelings about the relationship, which can be, incredibly discouraging and kind of hard to navigate about what to do.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you can so easily articulate those overall patterns because I'm sure a lot of people see themselves in those. So let's tap into each of those a little bit more.
Yeah.
You've said it's really easy for couples to put their relationship at the bottom of the list, especially after having kids. I feel like moms who I'm talking to the most, dads too, but moms have so many demands on their time and their energy and attention. What is your best advice for making our relationships a priority without it having to become another thing that we feel like we're managing?
Honestly, sometimes it's hard to talk about this because I'm so sensitive to the demands that I think all parents, but maybe moms in particular, do feel, and that there's lists of all the things that we're supposed to be doing and more things to manage or to keep track of and to prioritize. And it can be really hard to talk about how important your relationship with your partner is and how it might need some more of your time and attention when you're already feeling like you're drowning. You already feel so overwhelmed. The problem is that I see is, I'll see a lot of couples who will say, we don't have time for each other. We're exhausted at the end of the night. We fall on the couch and, both kind of scroll on our phones because we're so exhausted. And while that's very real, the problem is that when they don't make time for their relationship, so many other parts of their lives will suffer, right? Not only just how they feel towards the other person, but attachment research shows that when we have that secure relationship with our partner, it helps us do all the other things better. It
Mhm.
helps us feel more confident. It helps us feel more secure. It helps us handle the really stressful parenting moments. It helps us manage everything. It's almost like prioritizing your relationship with each other can almost give you the biggest bang for your buck in some ways, right? Is that when you have that solid relationship, it can have this ripple effect to you, to your relationship, to your whole family that I think sometimes is motivating to help, when you're feeling that overwhelm and exhaustion from all the other things.
Yeah, I actually have a quote that I want to share because it's super, I feel like really articulates what you're saying. You've said your relationship with your partner has so much impact on who you are and your quality of life. If your relationship is secure, you feel secure. If your relationship is suffering, you suffer. So I feel like I really respect your sensitivity to the fact that oftentimes parents are just wiped when they have kids who are little and the bedtime process is just so draining sometimes. But what can we do to put our relationships back on the front burner and not just, be in separate rooms, living separate nights on our phones at night?
Exactly. Yeah. So for me, the foundational piece of that is creating some really solid but practical routines and habits. So most couples before, early in their relationship, maybe before they had kids, had some routines and habits. They had some things that they did that were kind of, predictable. They probably didn't think of them as routines and habits. They probably just thought this is how we're in relationship together, we live together, and those things kind of kept their relationship solid, right? And then having kids and then in each season of life, those routines and habits have to shift, right? You don't have the same time available to you. You don't have the same resources, but so many couples struggle to create new ones. So many couples have such a hard time, understandably, figuring out, well, what can we do given this stage of life? Whether we have a 2-year-old or we have a 10-year-old, I would say that most couples need some daily habits, like some things that they're doing that are really small, but they're intentional. There's some, you've probably heard some of the research around, hellos and goodbyes, like hugging or kissing before you leave for the day and when you return, trying to stay in contact throughout the day, going to bed together, I think is a really good one. Even if you don't sleep in the same bed, even if, you might even have different bedtimes, having a ritual around that. So most couples need that kind of daily connection. And then most couples need some extended chunk of time, once a week, 2 times a week, 3 times a week, where they can hang out, they can talk, they can do something together. And every couple's different in terms of when that's going to be.
Mhm.
And I've noticed this in my own relationship as our kids have gotten older, is that time and that window has to change, right? Our kids' routines are changing, our own schedules, but we have to keep paying attention to that because it'd be so easy for that time that we spend together to kind of fall by the wayside as well.
Yeah, I want to reflect that back to you because I feel like these routines and habits are important because I think every busy woman probably has days where they feel like it's the end of the night and they're like, oh my God, have I even looked you in the eye to their
Yeah.
partners,
Right.
which is not what we're going for. So, okay, tell us just a little bit more about making it a point to greet your partner at different points of the day or staying in touch. Is there anything that you try to make almost non negotiable every day at your home?
Yeah, I mean, we say hello in the morning. I mean, and this sounds kind of simple, but maybe some people listening to this would feel like, well, of course you do that. But I know lots of couples I've worked with who don't, where we hug, we say good morning, we kind of check in to see how you slept, is even just like a really common one. It seems really small, but if we don't do that, I notice something. Like I feel a little bit of disconnection. I feel a little bit of even hurt if I don't feel like, my partner's checked in with me about how I'm doing, like when we wake up. And having that physical contact, I think, is a big thing too, that some couples can really lose. And they feel like, I haven't touched my partner in days. It's like that thread that's between the two of you, where you feel like there's something that's special and not just, the parallel lives or kind of, roommate scenario is having times during the day where you physically touch, I think is a really important part of that hello, goodbye on a daily basis.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know that date nights is an obvious option here for scheduling time, and I think it's important. I found that my husband and I, we don't get it right every time, but we kind of have this rule that when we're going on a date night, we can only talk about household logistics or kids during the commute. So if we're in a car or a cab or a walk wherever we're going, it's like blah blah, who's taking them to soccer, blah, and then I'm like done. And it's really important to me to feel interested and interesting and talk to my husband about the many things we have in common that we share outside of household and being parents. Do you have any other advice for having better date nights that really feel like you're connecting?
Yeah, I love that rule that you and your husband have. I think that's a great one. And you're right that the logistics can bleed into all the time. The other thing that I see that couples struggle with is maybe they're talking about things other than the kids or logistics, but they're talking about it in a way that's kind of informative. Like, let me tell you what's going on at work lately, or let me tell you what's going on with my sister who I talked to last night or something. And I think that most of us, what we're craving with our long term partners is feeling exactly what you said, interesting and interested. And for me, that comes from telling my partner things about me that are actually about my inner world, that are about, how I'm feeling and what's hard for me, what's exciting for me. And so I could talk about work, but if I don't do it in a way where I'm letting him know what's really happening for me on a deeper level, then it's going to stay pretty surface. And I think
Hmm.
most couples are frustrated about that. They don't like that, but they're not quite sure how to do that differently. And I think attuning to that and being willing to take a few minutes to kind of think through that and think, what do I want him to know about work that's actually significant for me? What's really energizing me lately that I could let him into? What have I been pretty anxious about that I could talk about and get support with? And I think kind of working with ourselves to go a little bit deeper in how we talk to our partners on those date nights, I think can really start to shift things.
I love that. And I totally get the distinction. It's like sometimes, even if it's not about the kids, you can just be talking in kind of an updates manner, like so and so
Yeah,
is out of the hospital. Or
right.
I like the idea of really sharing, like, what's alive for you right now. And sometimes in my life, if I'm feeling a little stale or like, it's easy to slip into the resentment zone. Like, I've got all these
Mhm.
big things and you don't even know what's going on. When I feel that way, I try to consciously ask my husband the type of question I would like to be asked.
I love that.
It's been a really empowering practice for me. And then obviously, it usually opens up to a more interesting reciprocal conversation. So that's something else just for people to ponder. We both talked about being interested and interesting. Something that I think I see in my communities is that moms share so much of their vibrancy and energy with their community, with their colleagues, with their kids. And then they're just kind of blah by the time that they get together with their partner. I also think that women really struggle with the time factor and wanting to have alone time and spend time on themselves, but also the relationship time. So, do you have any other suggestions for, making sure we're cultivating that sense of self and staying interesting, but also balancing alone time and maybe how that intertwines with quality relationship time?
Yeah, it's really important and that it kind of goes back to that balance, which is, I don't know if it's ever attained, right? I think this can be a bit of a taboo issue in couple relationships where a lot of couples I've worked with have a hard time talking openly about that, about the different needs that they have. Some couples spend, very little time together and are having a lot of alone time, and one or both people may be feeling like they want more time together. But more often than not, I actually see couples maybe spend like feeling an obligation to be together most nights. Maybe it's not so intentional, right? But they're not actually speaking up about, I need 1 or 2 nights a week where I'm totally on my own and I'm going to go to a different room of the house. I'm going to go out of the house somewhere. We're going to kind of have these designated nights. And that can be a hard conversation, right? There can be a lot of fears that come up, especially if you've been a couple that has spent more time together. There can be fears of, what does this mean? Does this mean something wrong's in our relationship? Does it mean you don't like to be with me? But I find it really helpful if couples can I find it helpful for me to normalize that, of course, you need different things, right? Of course, you need different needs to be met in your free time, the very little precious free time you have. And on the nights or on the weekends that you may need to fill with different parts of your life, with individual time, with couple time, with maybe time with friends. And I tend to see that it's when one category is kind of overemphasized at the expense of another category, that's where the struggle tends to be. So if you're spending most or all of your time together or most or all of your time separate or with other people, that's where usually the struggle is.
Oh, that's fascinating. I'm glad that you brought that up because I hadn't thought about that as like a permission slip. I've always just felt strongly in my relationship that me doing things that make me feel great and taking care of myself and connecting with other people is always kind of a worthwhile investment because I'm going to come back to our relationship and be energized. And I can see a lot of couples just kind of having watered down time together that's not really satisfying the couple time or scratching any creative or social itches for either of the partners. So that's interesting.
Yeah. And in your relationship, right, that might like work really well, like where maybe there's even a shared belief that time away is energizing and nourishing and good for each of you. But a lot of couples don't quite have that belief yet. Like
Mm.
there's guilt, there's obligation, there's like fear, or maybe they've just always done it a certain way and it feels like habit and they haven't even I've had someone say to me, I didn't even realize it was an option to have a couple nights a week where I am by myself and I'm going to go upstairs and read my book or I'm going to watch my own show. And so I think you're right, giving permission to that there are all sorts of needs that all of us have, but how do we talk about it openly with each other and almost work it out, negotiate it, right? Like what's the right balance for each of us and how do we kind of merge that with each other if we're a little bit different? Because most couples need a little bit different things than the other person.
Makes sense. I know that the holidays are pretty much upon us. And while many of us have helpful partners, the research still shows that women overwhelmingly shoulder the burden for anticipating and planning and executing a lot of the holiday magic. I really want to see caregivers and women in the Electric Ideas community show up to celebrations joyfully and not burn out. What can we do to better communicate with our partners in advance of the holidays and during the holidays so we don't kind of get into that resentment, burnt out, overwhelmed zone, which is so easy to fall into, by the way?
It is a lot. And I think the problem is that for most women, it's a continuation of patterns that may be happening all year round. And then it feels more intense during the holidays because there's the normal tasks that have to be done. And now there's a whole, giant list of things that have to be done that are for the holidays. So then we're bringing into maybe some of the resentment or the frustration that we're feeling generally around how we divide labor to the holiday time. For me, the place to start is to especially if we're talking to women here, is to invite your partner to sit down with you to talk about the holidays in general, not just invite your partner to pick up these three tasks for you, but ask them to sit down with you and say, can we talk about this holiday season? In the past, I have felt overwhelmed. I felt like I was doing too much, and I don't want to feel like that again. And I want us to see if we can create something different this year. Can we sit down on Sunday night and talk about it? Because that mindset is so different than these are my jobs and I'm going to delegate them to you. We have a set of tasks that have to be done this holiday season. Let's talk together about how we want to go about that. It's a very different kind of approach to that conversation in general.
That's an opener for me instead of a closer, and
Yeah.
nobody likes to feel like they're just delegating or trying to voluntold as a,
Yeah, exactly.
you know. But I feel like this brings me back to what you're talking about at the beginning of a lot of one of the three categories of patterns that you see is not feeling like you're having a partner. And so I'm really just appreciating your open dialogue of bringing them in as a partner, not someone who's just going to be grumpy about what they're being told to do.
Yes, exactly. And usually when that happens, at least when I have done this, because we can struggle with this at times too, is I'm already so resentful by the time that I ask for help. Right?
Mm.
I'm already, I've been, really frustrated and kind of ruminating on it. And then I finally get to the point where I'm, asking for help. And that doesn't go well either, right? Because then your partner feels like they're getting all this frustration from you. And maybe they didn't realize that you were feeling this way. And so starting the conversation from a different place, I think, is a really big deal. And then I really encourage, and this can be hard, but I really encourage couples to have an honest conversation about what it's been like in the past and to really describe, how each person has felt and the frustrations that have been there, and to take an honest look at what are the actual tasks that have to be done, both visible and invisible. And this kind of goes into the mental load kind of stuff, which is often not seen. But if those things aren't seen, then partners aren't necessarily aware that those things are being done and may have a different perspective on where the balance lies that may not be so accurate.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. I love that idea of asking for help before we're in that resentment zone. Because even the tone of your voice, you can just picture it. This year, my husband and I kind of have a system where on Monday nights we have a logistical meeting. We started doing something instead of just to-dos and looking at the calendar and catching up on logistics, because I do think that's been an important practice for us to almost just have this space where I felt like I could talk through everything and not just one-off him about random changes of date. And so that's been a very nourishing practice for our relationship. But we started recently having like 5 to 10 things of the quarter that were just bigs we call them our rocks. And it's just like, okay, this is a big thing, like holidays coming up. And I realized that we started talking about the holidays in general way earlier. Like we just talked about it this week already. And it made me realize that I'm starting to think about stuff like ritual wise, for example, like, are we going to go to this concert because we need to get tickets now? Are we going to do tea or did we outgrow that? Just stuff like that that's already percolating in my mind that, not to be sexist, this is just happens to be with my husband. Like he's not thinking about Christmas till Christmas time.
Yeah.
And I feel like some of the resentment that's probably common in women, and I'd be curious what you found, is that our mental ticker is going like, and we've already put so much mental, emotional energy into something before we get to it. But if I don't share that or bring him in, how's he supposed to know?
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with this, and great job that y'all are already having these kinds of conversations. And you're right, because most women I know, and myself included, our brains don't stop in those ways, right? We're often wired to be thinking about those things and to feel some responsibility around accomplishing them, right? And I do think that having a practice of, like you said early on, of starting to have the conversation and outlining. I mean, I have a template I give people that kind of walks through the really common tasks that happen in the holiday season and start to assign them so that both partners can see all that has to be done ahead of time and then decide ahead of time how they're going to delegate, which is simple. It sounds simple, but most people are not doing this and it creates a lot of stress.
Yeah. I think that sometimes women, even if they're going to do a lopsided amount of the work, it's nice to feel recognized and like appreciated. And so I feel like we can capture that in the show notes because I think women would like to see that and just have it all like, okay, I can handle most of this, but I just want you to know that there's a lot that goes into this. So that makes sense. Whether it's holidays or outside of holidays, something that I've been really working on is choosing when to nag or not. Like nobody likes a
Mm,
nag. And I really hate this narrative that women sometimes have of like, I have to do everything or it doesn't get done right. Like, I feel like that's just irritating to me. But then sometimes it happens to me and I have to really zip my lips. I'll give a personal example. My husband kindly went to get the snacks for my daughter's soccer team. And I didn't really think I needed to micromanage this. And I didn't. But he came back with some kind of like diet popcorn that isn't, it's like, okay, I don't know if the kids are going to be pumped about that. And then like no other option. And I'm just like, I don't know. It just would have been intuitive for me to get like a couple things in case there's allergies or someone didn't like that. And I just like wanted so bad to be like, why did he ruin the snack? But I just chose in that moment to be like, this is not an emergency. And I would want grace given the,
mm.
opposite. But it's something that I feel like really erodes relationships when you're constantly, especially with kids stuff, like finding ways to pick and dig. And I'm curious if you have any insight or inspiration there.
Yeah, I love that example. So did you let it go or did you say something? I'm curious.
So I let it go in the moment. And I feel like later when I wasn't like annoyed, which is so silly, I'm like, this is so dumb. Like there's plenty of things going on in the world. Why am I annoyed by this? But I was, I'll be honest. I didn't
Mhm.
say anything at the time, but later I made a half comment in a little bit of a more joking manner, when I
Mhm.
felt like it wasn't, you did this wrong. I try to really be conscious of not bringing that energy into the relationship. There's much
Yeah.
bigger things to worry about in the grand scheme.
Right. Right. I love this example because I think it's so relatable. But your response tells me that you probably don't feel a ton of ongoing resentment about things like this. Right. And my guess is because you'll have those, I call them admin nights, where you like once a week, you kind of check in about that's another habit that's really important about, the weeks coming up and things you're working on together and, things that need to happen. My guess is that you talk about those kinds of things during those meetings. And so there's not just this overflowing well of frustration about things that, are feeling. And my guess is that helps you from not in the moment kind of firing back a frustrated or sarcastic comment about the diet popcorn. Which is great. And for people who can't do that, if they do find themselves kind of feeling like everything that happens feels wrong and they respond frustratedly, to me that means they need a better system for how to talk about these things, right? They need a better system for planning the tasks and for checking in about how they're going. Because that's the piece that I think a lot of people miss. I think more people are trying to look at their system and how they're dividing labor, which is amazing, but I don't hear as much about what's our process for checking in about that? Because they're
Mm.
inevitably not going to go well. Like when someone's learning to do something new, or when both people are trying to change their kind of routines and the tasks that they're responsible for, there's going to be differences in how you approach those tasks or when they're done. But if you don't have a space and a specific time that you check in about how that's going, then it's going to come out in every moment and feel frustrating and feel like there's like all this criticism and negativity all the time.
Yeah, that is a really good point. I feel like I'd encourage someone to almost just write it down, what they would feel like they need to say. And then if they still really need to say
Yeah.
something, like do it the next day or do it when it feels like a calm moment and try to like practice not being in that reactivity. Cause then you're genuinely responding, not just saying something from a place of annoyance. None of us get it right all the time. I know we're coming up on time and this is another whole big topic, but I just want to get a couple quick ideas for you. This is a time in our lives when having kids, sometimes it forces the issue on big choices. I think it's really common for people to be thinking about, do we need to move closer to family? Does somebody need to change a job so there's more flexibility? Should we have another child? Should we get a dog? I mean, some of these decisions that have lots of long term implications. I come back to the list you had. I'm curious if you can help us understand some common patterns around conflict when it comes to making these big decisions and how we can consciously partner when we're making them.
Yeah, I love that. I see it as usually two camps. One, there's the decision that couples are trying to make, and it's not that they disagree, they just haven't decided. They're both just a little uncertain. And to me, that one just needs more conversation, more time trying to get to the heart of the matter. But the conflict that I see is when they disagree, right? When one person wants to move closer to family and one person wants to stay put, for example. And what I see happening is that both people are typically so attached to their desired outcome. They really want the thing that they want, which is understandable, right? And so they typically try to get that by convincing their partner, right? That their conversations just center on, let me tell you why I want to do what I want to do. And then the other person counters with, well, let me tell you why I want to do what I want to do. And it's a deadlock. And neither person is really, not that we don't care, but showing care for the other person's desires and wants. And humans just have a really hard time dropping our desires if we're not feeling like our most intimate partner is caring about them, right? And so what's really helpful is to kind of practice when you're in that decision making space and having that kind of conversation. How can we almost take turns sharing with the other person about why we want this decision? And while we're doing that, we're each going to like let go of our own desire in that moment, right? We're going to try to really listen and hear about what that's about. And then we're going to, switch to the other person. And sometimes when we do that, I've seen couples and I've experienced this myself, it can become a little clearer. It can feel a little bit like, oh, I didn't even realize that this was what was at stake for you. I didn't even
Mhm.
realize that this was the heart of why you wanted, this outcome. And sometimes that can just naturally shift things. The other thing is, I think it can be really helpful if you're really stuck, is to kind of start to brainstorm, well, what could we do to help me be okay with the outcome that I don't prefer? Right? What
Mhm.
are the things that we could do like that could make this more doable for me? And then what are the things that we could do for you to help you be more okay with the outcome that you don't prefer? So to open up the possibility of this may not be my preferred outcome, but if we did these things, that might feel okay for me. And that can sometimes clear a path as well.
I really like that because it feels like first just trying to bring that curiosity and deep listening instead of coming with your agenda, which is so easy to do,
Yeah.
especially on these big things if people are really passionate about. And then I do like the second thing you said because I feel like anything that can just get you out of gridlock. And it seems like that comes back to the team. Like, no, this isn't my first choice, but if this was something that is important to you, it's almost like, how could I make this work? Not saying you are, but I feel like
Yeah.
that's a really good thing to explore and just to shift the conversation. So I really appreciate that. All right. Well, I know we've covered a lot of topics and territory. Is there anything that's come to mind about any of the questions I've asked you that you kind of want to add anything? Or is there any way that you really feel like we can show up simply as better partners?
I mean, sometimes it feels like the heart of all of this. And to be fair, this is hard for a lot of couples, but the heart of any of these issues that we've talked about is just how do we talk to our partner about it? And A, are we having any conversations about it? Or are we kind of, avoiding these conversations or fearful about how they might go? And then when we bring them up, are we doing it from a place of vulnerability and sharing our own feelings? Or are we coming at it, maybe unintentionally in a more attacking way or a more even with a complaint that puts our partner kind of immediately on the defensive? And maybe, they worry that things are even worse than they are because the way we're approaching it. To me, that's the universal skill in all of this is how do we kind of approach each other and have a consistent ability to talk through things as they come up and not let them build up.
I always end my episode with a chance for reflection. So, in this area of intentionally revitalizing our relationship with our partner post kids, what's one question women could be asking themselves more?
Such a good question. I would say, what is the heart of what I want in this relationship? And what ability do I have to get that? Acknowledging that I don't have control over the whole thing, that my partner's got to meet me here. But what are the pieces that I can focus on and do and ask for and share about that will let my partner really understand what I'm needing or wanting in our relationship?
That's very empowering. Thank
Mhm.
you. I know that my listeners are going to really enjoy this and have a lot of takeaways. So, where can we find you and follow you and continue to learn more?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Let's Love Well, and my website is letslovewell.com. And I've got a free masterclass up right now that is a good introduction to a lot of the ways that couples can work on their relationship after becoming parents.
Wonderful. All right. We can also include that in the show notes. Abby, this was a joy. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you joined me today. If you're looking for more, feel free to connect with me on Instagram at @WhitneyWoman. And if you enjoyed the show, I invite you to support me by leaving a review or sharing it with a friend. Hope you have an inspired day.